Okay, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and get us going. Looks like Go-To Training decided to let me in this time, which is exciting to see. I do apologize for the technical issues that happened last week. It was repeatedly telling me that I had an incorrect password and username, even though I was already logged into the website, so I'm not sure what was going on there. Whoops. I apologize for that. I'm not often accused of being loud, so that's a new experience for me. Oh, okay. Hope you guys are doing okay tonight. The class seems to be going along smoothly for the most part. As far as announcements, if you haven't already, take a look at Connect and see what's going on for Hall of Fame. Even for online students, they have some live streams of some of the panels. So there's some really neat stuff going on there. I have been pretty tied up and I haven't been able to really get into a lot of it, but there's been some really fun stuff, but as well as really informative panels going on that you can log in with. As far as our class itself goes, I have started taking a look at this week's explorations. So I'm about 2/3 of the way through those, and we'll finish those up tonight. And then tomorrow and Friday we'll get the week 2 visual mission statement projects taken care of and get those to you in a more timely manner than last week. I know I was a little late getting that feedback back to you, to some of you, so apologies for that, but back on my normal schedule now. And let's see, anything else? As far as overall comments on the work so far, I've been really pleased with what I'm seeing. The Photoshop practices are especially looking really good. So I don't know if it's just more experienced Photoshop users this month, or if you guys are just really picking it up really well. But that's looking good, and that's really great because that'll set you up for success coming into the final project. The mood boards looked really good. Sometimes there's a chance where sometimes I see that the mood board concept is kind of misinterpreted going into that project, and I really didn't see that to be the case here. Everybody seemed to understand its purpose, and as a planning tool, and really documenting your ideas. And when you use a mood board, usually you're using it to collaborate with others. So it's a good habit to get into, to just really be detailed and thorough in documenting why you made some of the choices that you did. If anybody's ever done any kind of programming or coding, you know that you always comment your code, so anybody that comes after you will know what each part does and why it's there. And it's kind of like that. You want to document why you're making these choices and what you have in mind. You're taking the role right now of a creative director or an artistic director who's communicating to a client or a team. So kind of adopt that mindset as you go through the parts of the mood board. And I will be playing the part of your client / team member who is interpreting that creative vision. So this will be, as you're probably familiar, the last week of new content being added in the class. And then next week we'll move into reflection and also kind of bringing all the things together. So synthesizing all that we've explored and putting it into practice with that final project. So really get familiar with the Photoshop techniques. We're going to be doing some more advanced photo compositing this week, and that, along with the color techniques, will really come in handy as we go into week 4. Does anybody have any questions or any concerns that I can address or help you out with? All right. Well, if anything comes to mind as we go along, let me know. Otherwise, this week's topic is dealing with, well, there's actually two topics this time instead of the single topic we've been doing. This week we're going to talk about the use of typefaces and font styles, as well as visual hierarchy. And I'll get into visual hierarchy a little later. But, and this is very timely with yesterday being Valentine's Day, the reason fonts matter. And I'll use the words font and typeface interchangeably. They're really not the same thing, but it's become common to use them to mean the same thing. Typeface is the specific type that you're using, the style of lettering, while font is the specific characteristics of that typeface. Things like the font weight, how bold it is, the color, and the point size, and so forth. So, but in modern times, we use those pretty much interchangeably, I think, in part due to the advent of web design and web designers using those words interchangeably. And it just became common practice. Anyway, this graphic on the screen is very timely, as I was saying, for Valentine's Day, as you see the message written down in red letters saying you'll always be mine. It looks very sweet and romantic in the top graphic, but just change out that typeface and suddenly it becomes something rather menacing. Message is still the same, just the style has changed. So it's kind of unsettling. And this is one reason why fonts matter, and especially in our exploration of media design. Just like your imagery, just like your color choices, this will set the stage for the message that you're trying to convey. A good knowledge of art history is handy in this case. And I know you guys are taking art history either this month or for, I believe, campus students take it concurrently, and it might be a little bit different order for online students. But as you go into art history, I don't know if typefaces are necessarily emphasized, but you will encounter them, especially in periods of art such as the Art Nouveau during the 1890s-ish, around there, where it became very organic and elegant, and then moving into early 20th century with things like the carnival signs that are very retro, and 1960s counterculture with the flower power sign, but also just general moods and general themes like the bank with that very stark and serious serif typeface in large blocky letters, or more elegant script like this Paris image over here. And it can even evoke specific themes like the technology theme with the very high-tech looking, very futuristic looking typeface. So a good grasp of the history of typefaces is helpful. But also just considering the kind of mood that you want to create. Just like with your colors, if you want to use, more brighter analogous colors to create a very soft and friendly look versus really stark contrasting colors to create a more exciting or energetic look, your typefaces can play a similar part. Really relevant to this week's mood board segment is using typefaces for branding. Branding is much, much more than just logos. It includes the official brand colors, the personality of the brand, even the tone of voice they use within their advertising, but especially involves use of typography. When you look at this graphic, what brand comes to mind? So, look familiar at all? Yeah, and that is Coke, even though the wording, doesn't refer to Coca-Cola. That very familiar typeface has become really iconic. It's kind of like with visual storytelling. You don't necessarily have to be told what it's referring to. It simply is apparent in the imagery. And we become so conditioned to recognize some of these that it really doesn't matter what they say. You instantly think of Coca-Cola. The Disney font is very similar. Some of these newer typefaces are becoming just as iconic, like Yahoo and the Harry Potter kind of chaotic looking typeface that they use. So when establishing any kind of brand identity, and brand identity is not just relevant in marketing, it's part of almost every aspect of media today. Every outlet has their own look and feel and personality, and that's established through these kind of factors. But this is a really big part of it, is picking a typeface that suits your personality. Some of these are probably custom made for that specific entity. And, unless you have your own budget for a creative team, you might not be able to make your own typefaces, but you can find some pretty unique ones out there. And through consistent use of that, establish a given look and feel and recognizable brand. And the key there is consistency. Use your brand colors consistently, use your typefaces consistently, and use your just overall visual style consistently. Burger King has a very distinct look, and you see this very big slab serif typeface. It's really heavy and bold, and that's used pretty ubiquitously on their materials. This is an advertisement, but if you went into the restaurant, you would see signs posted and posters that had that exact same look. And even on their packaging and their website, it's consistent across the board. So when you're doing your mood board this week, that's going to be the factor that you're really focusing on, is establishing that look for your own personal brand that goes into your design. So thinking about what kind of personality you want to convey. Is it, do you want to be a very serious professional? Do you want to have a more, fun-loving look, a more upbeat and outgoing look, or is it just, something completely different, something really unique? Oh, hi, Letitia. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm sorry, I was in traffic.
No worries. I'm just glad to actually be online this week. Last week was a bit of a mess.
That is true. I was very confused, but I'm glad that we were able to meet right now.
Great. All right. So we just gotten into typefaces for branding, and the importance of using typefaces consistently to create a distinct media personality. This week's exploration really got into factors for choosing your typefaces. It's not a real concrete formula for choosing typefaces. A lot of it comes with having a clear idea of the image you want to create, and as I mentioned earlier, some knowledge of art history and the history of some of these styles helps. Just being aware of how some of these different style typefaces are used is very helpful. Just as you go through your day, take note of these things, how they're used, where they're used, and why a particular business chooses to do their signage in a given typeface and style. Some of them seem completely disconnected, whereas others make logical sense. There's not far from where I live, there's on Lee Road here in Orlando, there's a row of businesses, and they all have such unique signage. There's a place called Skycraft that sells kind of DIY electronic stuff, and they have a very kind of retro futuristic look. And then there's Orlando Vintage with kind of a turn of the century-ish, almost kind of Western looking typeface, and a security business that has their very very serious typeface that's on there, and so you can see how those suit their purposes. But when you're not really paying attention to these styles, then you can really create a very strong disconnect. One thing and I mentioned Art Nouveau before, and that was a big art movement back around the turn of the 20th century, a little before, but they have a very elegant and organic look to their to the art style then, and I've seen that used in some of the mood boards and referred to as a very modern look, and it's sort of like, well, I mean, it's it's not really, but if you don't have that understanding, then it can be you can accidentally give a wrong impression, wrong overall personality. And I've been taking a look at some of the exploration posts for this week, and you guys have found some really neat examples that I haven't encountered yet. Because after a few months, I've gotten to see most of these book covers a few times, but there were some original ones popping up that I really enjoyed, and I'm using some of those here. This one's a great example of kind of own awareness of your theme, and the title of the book is Bases Loaded, and there's sort of this visual metaphor of the baseball bat that joins into a hypodermic needle. But looking at those typefaces used, you have that that script typeface that's really iconic for baseball. A lot of signage uses that, some of the classic baseball cards and so forth. And then you've got the blocky stenciled looking letters that look like something you'd see on the jerseys themselves. So they're really taking themes directly from the sport and creating that connection. Really similarly here, this is intended to look like a newspaper headline, and so they're using those big, bold serif typefaces to create the look and feel of an old newspaper. It looks like something you might see from World War II or so. And these are pretty blatant examples. Like these are the choices are pretty obvious. If you're going for these themes, they're kind of given to you. Your own choices can be more subtle, and so some of the look and feel will be a little more perhaps, I don't want to say generic, but less clearly themed. And actually, this one I would like to get back to in a few. This is one of the new ones that I encountered. I had never seen this book cover in an exploration, and I thought this was really neat in how it demonstrates the power of use of a typeface and style, because it juxtaposes those two contrasting styles so closely. You have a very structured, very serious, and kind of academic look on the left, and then the rip down the center where it goes into just this very chaotic and kind of electric looking typeface that's very distorted. It looks like there's all the lines of action, like an explosion, that almost look like they've shattered the letters. And it's juxtaposing those two themes. It's the book is a journey through the madness industry, so you kind of have this two competing themes of structure and stability versus chaos and madness in a literal sense. These are some that I really like, especially the Superman. It's Superman title, because it shows you how positioning and style of your typeface can create a sense of action. In some of the early exploration or Photoshop practice activities, I've mentioned I might have given some suggestions for placing your text in different creative ways. The text can interact with the image itself, and that's something we see here. It actually shows the path that Superman is taking as he flies away, giving a really strong sense of action. He's that little tiny dot right there, by the way. But even something as simple as this, with a slight tilt, can give a sense of movement that goes along with that, the mountain climbing theme. And these kind of things can be pretty easily achieved in Photoshop, especially this effect. The Superman is a little trickier, but using the text distort, you can do something like that. Or text warping. The readings for this week, and this is getting into how to choose and pair different typefaces. They refer to headings and body typeface, which is really more relevant for a document or a website content where you have distinctive headings and then large copy text copy content. But we can think of that as simply being your primary and your secondary typefaces that you're pairing together to create a given style. Their basic rule of thumb was to build in contrast so that your headings or your titles stand out and your detailed information or your body text remains very legible. So from a design standpoint, rather than a document standpoint, it would be something like this with headings and detailed body text. Okay. So you see that here with going back to the bases loaded example, where here you actually have two more stylized heading typefaces and then a more plain and readable body text typeface. And the most important factor when you're choosing text for a document, for your body text, the content, is that it be readable. You want to have a unique style, but you don't want to make it difficult for your viewers to consume your content. So it's easy to fall into these pit traps of using these really interesting looking typefaces, but when you see those in large quantities of text, it just becomes a strain on the eye. So best to stick to these classic typefaces, the basic sans serif or serif typefaces. Sans serif are the ones that are more plain. They're just, they don't have any, the little decorative hooks on the corners and so forth. They tend to be more modern looking. And there's some debate over which is more easily readable, but either style is roughly equal in terms of the value for using in documents and so forth. Serif are more classic looking with the little extensions at the corners. Those are called serifs. It's often called more old-fashioned looking and more classic looking. Can be very business-like. So a lot of times you'll see financial institutes using something more like this. So when you choose your own typefaces, which you'll be doing for your mood board, think about the personality you want to convey. Do you want something more modern and kind of sleek, or something more classic and I don't want to say old-timey or old-fashioned, but it can have that look. Some of the serif typefaces are very friendly and very approachable. Lucida has sort of a unique look. Rockwell is, I would say, is old-fashioned looking. It looks like old, early 20th century signage. Whereas something like Futura is, as the name implies, ultra-modern, very futuristic. And one of the a best practice in, say, web design is to always make your headings stand out so that your audience can skim the content and find the information that they're looking for, specific topics they're looking for. And that's something that is emphasized in the readings this week. And so when you create your headings or your titles for your media, you want it to stand out from all the other content. And so using a different typeface is the key for that. The basic rule of thumb is if you're using a serif typeface for your body text, use the opposite, a sans serif for your headings, and vice versa. In some cases, like Helvetica New, you can use different versions of the same font family with something like Helvetica New Black that's really heavy. So it creates enough contrast. But this is also where you have some room for creating personality, using some of these more interesting looking fonts, because you're not going to be using your heading typeface for a large block of text. You can keep it small, keep it short, and it'll stay readable. These look like logo or logo types, but they're actually just the names of the typefaces used. And so you can see some of the contrasting styles that have been put together. Here you have another kind of sports themed one, League Gothic, with that script typeface. It almost reminds me of something that might be in a sports bar. Versus say the Lot versus F8 Lentil, that are both kind of very stylish, kind of metropolitan looking, something that you might see in a fashion magazine, or having a really this Futura in Georgia, where it's kind of old meets new, classic versus futuristic contrast. And like I said, there's not really a specific formula for how to combine these two. It really comes down to finding something that matches the personality you want to create and making sure that there's a good contrast between them. You'll basically never see two script typefaces used together. So like the handwritten style will usually be paired with something a little more structured. Edwardian script with Century Gothic. So there's another kind of old versus new combination. And look for your themes. If you're creating a 1960s kind of counterculture hippie style, which I always think of the Mellow Mushroom Pizza Place with this one. You have that option, something that's more electronic gaming related, and so on. But you just don't want to get so stylized that you start losing your readability at the same time. So you have more flexibility, but within limits. And this is actually where I wanted to revisit that one book cover. This is probably going farther back than it's really worth. Right here. This is another example of using contrasting typefaces, but in a different sense. This isn't just creating a brand, this is adding emphasis through different typefaces, because our brains, I think I've mentioned before, are geared to look for patterns, and any change in the pattern catches our attention. So that simple change to italics for the with upper and lowercase sets that word apart. And and I'm left wondering, well, why is the of particular importance here? Is it to emphasize that there is a singular, unique assault on reason, or as opposed to an assault on reason that's more isolated? Not sure, but it does kind of create that added emphasis. Questions so far?
No, everything's pretty clear of what you're saying so far.
Okay. So a couple of just kind of tips and tricks, and I will have probably commented on given feedback on some of your Photoshop practice that kind of coincide with some of these ideas. Just general best practices when using text in designs. First, don't choose form over function, and this goes back to that idea of maintaining readability. You want to create a unique style. You want your designs to look stylish, but not at the cost of effectiveness. And so, use the form, which is kind of the aesthetically attractive designs, strategically to create, has headers and has titles to create the look and feel, but then go back to something more functional for the fine details. So you can see the difference in these menu pages. The one on the right is practically unusable because of that distorted typeface. I've seen a trend with a lot of online memes lately on social media where there's kind of a whole bunch of typefaces used in conveying a short message. And it looks very quirky and can work okay if that's the specific artistic style you're going for, but in general, don't use too many typefaces. More than 2 is pushing it, and 3 would be a really special case. It just will look cluttered. It looks like you might have made a formatting error and left something unchanged during the process of creation. So stick to 1 or 2 at the most as you're creating your various media. And that really applies in most cases, regardless of the media you're working on. 2 typefaces in a website can help you differentiate titles and content, but more than that, and it's just going to start looking messy. Probably the number 1 comment I make in Photoshop practice assignments is about contrast. Make sure your text is readable. Take a step back away from your monitor. If you can still see your text and read it clearly, you might be doing okay, but make sure that stands out. White or black text on a white background is ideal for reading, and a dark background with light text is kind of a secondary choice, not as desirable, but it will work. But beyond that, just whatever style you're using, make sure that there's good contrast. This one in the upper right is not good. I can read that sitting right here in front of my monitor, but someone that might have visual impairments would have a lot of difficulty. And if I'm taking standing a few steps back, I wouldn't be able to read that as easily. And busy background images cause a similar problem. Sometimes you can, actively change the color of your letters to go along with the changes in color in the background if you want to take the time to do that. But finding a good contrasting color is key. And then there's such a thing as too much contrast. If using these complementary colors that are super saturated, it gets to be very jarring. And that's what you see down here in the lower left. So this is another thing that's kind of a judgment call. Take a look, make sure that you're not burning out your reader's retinas with the amount of saturation and contrast. Okay, this one I would like for you to take a look at and tell me what's wrong with what's wrong with the text formatting in this case. How would you read this message, and what is it trying to say?
Well, I would read Arctic Fox. I don't know if that's what I'm supposed to be reading.
Mm-hmm.
But I also see the I forgot what they call, but like the the distance between the letters is very different from each other. So like the R and the C, the difference in Arctic is like very different from C and T, and
Oh,
that's
okay.
bothering me a little bit.
Okay. No, yeah,
But
that's true. Take a look at the text down, the smaller text at the bottom.
oh,
You're able to see that.
oh, I see it. So okay, I started reading the black one and then I started reading the white one, but then I
Mhm.
realized that it's like it continues. Like it's been giving instead of like been giving which is white, I was supposed to be reading this white fox has been given the name due to its coat. So, which
Yeah,
I don't know, the colors kind of separate into different texts, and I don't think that's supposed to be happening.
right. Intuitively, you would read the black block of text and then the white block of text as separate pieces, but it's really laid out so that it should read from left to right all the way across the image. I wish this was an example that I created specifically for this point, but this is something I came across online just by chance. Um, but it's a great example of how what not to do, for one thing, in terms of um, being kind to your reader. Really consider how they would intuitively read your content and accommodate that kind of intuitive reading style. We're all conditioned to read left to right, top to bottom, but we also naturally where our brains naturally um, group things based on how they look. Whether it's the color of the text or their proximity to one another, um, and if there's a natural division, which all of those are the case here. You have two different colors. You have an actual dividing line between the two, and there's a separation in space. So it's like they've done everything possible to tell us that these are two different blocks of text. Point being, don't do this. Or there's even more subtle examples that go along with this, but um, associate the words that are supposed to go together through the spacing. You put them close together. Don't put intuitive divisions, and just really consider how your viewer would naturally read this. This is another example that's similar, um, a little less blatant, but you still have that intuitive dividing line that tells us these are two separate messages, but really they're not. It is reading left to right. So in this case, I might have actually taken more of a left versus right format. Say whether you see it or not doesn't affect my work ethic. Um, with it split between each side, um, just for ease of reading.
Wow, I miss this word art thing. They don't have it anymore.
They don't have it anymore in like Photoshop or Word.
It's
I guess they used to have it. Um, well, my purpose for including this was actually
word they changed it. Now it's more pretty.
okay. Yeah, and these were pretty extreme examples, but the reason for this slide was to actually caution you away from using this kind of thing, um, at least not to a great extent. And of course, we're using Photoshop, which doesn't have these specific features, but it has some similar functions that you could really abuse. They have the 3D transform tools now, and drop shadows and text warping and so forth. You can do really great things with these if you do it very purposefully, but they can also be overused. If you're just distorting text and making it curved or arched without good reason, then then you're really probably diminishing the effectiveness of your media. Um, I showed the Superman example earlier with the text curving upward, following the path that he took in Superman was took in his flight. And that's very deliberately and purposefully done. It has a reason for being done. But unless you have that kind of stylistic reason, I would avoid these for the most part. All right, and I don't know if you do have any questions, let me know. I think that everyone's generally doing good, and as far as just kind of throwing them out there as they come to mind.
Yeah, I don't have any questions right now.
Okay, so that's a quick look at the use of typeface for creating style and some examples of what not to do. I'm going to shift gears a little bit now, and this is a separate but somewhat related topic, and that is visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy is really has to do with composition and kind of your arrangement of elements in the page. And it's all about creating a very deliberate experience for your audience. As a media creator, we want to make sure that our message is conveyed exactly the way we want it to be expressed and received, clearly by our audience. So part of that is the idea of creating a very guided experience, making sure they look where we want them to look first and take in the parts that we want to really emphasize. The word hierarchy simply means a classification in order of importance. So from most to least, or least to most important, depending on which way you're going. One that we are often familiar with is the hierarchy of kind of the social order in, say, medieval Europe, where you have the king and queen on the top, and then they have the nobles that are below them in sort of social standing, and they have the knights and then the peasants at the bottom that are kind of the low person on the totem pole that are doing all of the work. Since we're talking about visual media, our hierarchy is going to deal with what is noticed first, and then moving down to those details that are noticed next in line, till you get down to just sort of the background noise of a design. This is sometimes referred to as dominance, say a dominant element in a design, and then subdominant, followed by the details or subordinate elements. This is really a very important concept because if you just kind of throw all the information out there and don't take steps to make sure that key details are taken in, then the message may or may not be received effectively. So taking a look at this poster design, what would you say is the top of the visual hierarchy?
The coffee cup.
Okay. What establishes it as the most dominant element?
I would say because it's an opposite color from the scheme itself. It's not blue, so it definitely stands out. It's also in the eye level. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, I
Oh,
can hear
okay.
you.
It's
It's pretty low.
also in the eye level, so it's more centered than a perfect blend. Um, and the size as well. It's bigger and it's more. It's the first thing you see. I would say the first element that makes it stand out so much is the color.
Right, yeah, it's that complementary color, right? From our color theory, it's the opposite on the color wheel. of orange and blue.
Yeah.
So yeah, they really made that made use of that color contrast to make that element stand out. And you made a good observation as far as the level. It's at the eye level and it's centered. Why do you think this particular element was emphasized?
Because it shows I don't have to read the, what this event is about to kind of assume that it's about coffee and music. So visually, I don't have to read it anywhere. It's kind of it's implied already because there's the I don't know the name in English. I'm sorry, but like the smoke thing. Yeah.
Yeah, like a treble clef.
And yeah. So it kind of describes already what the event is about without them having to write it down.
Yeah, that's it's kind of a visual metaphor for the nature of this business. And then that kind of gives way to the secondary element, which is the name of the place itself. So a perfect blend being the name of the business. And it's really low contrast. It doesn't stand out against that blue background, but its size and its placement kind of just below that eye level helps it become a point of emphasis.
Oh yeah.
So these are some of the techniques that you can use for visual hierarchy. Color is probably the most powerful technique for creating hierarchy, creating dominance in an element, making it stand out with the complementary colors. We don't really get into texture differences too much. That is something you might touch on in graphic design, but textures being sort of, like the tree texture and the landscaping you see in the background. It goes back to that idea of our inclination to notice patterns, and when a pattern changes, it gets our attention. Shape and size and position, as we noted with the size and placement of the cup, and orientation. Orientation is, I wish I had an example of this, but it's sort of like if there's a pattern of objects arranged in a particular way, and then suddenly one is placed in a slightly different position, it stands out in our eyes because, again, we have pattern recognition. We look for that just instinctively. So, most basic example of visual hierarchy. This is kind of a literal hierarchy going from big, bright red letters down to less bold gray lettering, and then just stepping down in intensity as we go. That's the most basic idea of visual hierarchy. Imagery in this case is de-emphasized, with it being off to the side and cut, kind of cut in half in both cases. But very structured, very purposeful. So there's no doubt what they wanted you to notice first, and that is the author. I would guess that this author is known. I'm not familiar with them myself, but perhaps they've had some successful writing in the past. Apparently, Hotel World is among them. A lot of times, especially with book covers, but also with media in general, I would think in headlines or website banners and so forth, you'll see emphasis given to keywords, and typically those keywords will be the most emotionally charged words. Like here, the title is "The Fallacy of Campaign Finance Reform," but fallacy is huge in comparison to the other letters, and it is also the most emotionally charged of the terms in this title because it's accusatory. It's calling something false. And so that's going to grab attention of someone who is, perhaps interested in that sort of subject to begin with. it's it plays upon our more primitive emotions of of wrongdoing. This one and the next one, I kind of wish I had on the same slide. These are cases where there really isn't a whole lot of visual hierarchy going on. Everything is pretty flat in terms of emphasis. Perhaps the exception being the girl hiding her face, and simply due to the color contrast of warm versus cool, the cool green in the back. And another case of complementary color use with the orange, kind of rusty orange, standing out so strongly against that blue background. There's an example I used to use, and I may want to put it back in here, but have you ever seen the movie The Life of Pi?
Yeah.
With where he's trapped on the life raft in the Pacific Ocean. Most of that film is him on the life raft, and that life raft is bright orange, and it's set against the blue of the ocean and the sky. And so it's really a strategy for maintaining your focus on that point in the screen. The tiger as well is a color that's high contrast. And as it happens, that's actually why those life rafts are orange in real life, is because they stand out from the backdrop. And so if search and rescue is out looking for you, they'll find you more easily. But they certainly made really strong use of that within the film. It's really striking. That's a really incredibly visually striking film altogether. And there's a lot of different design techniques you can use for directing attention. One of them, and let's see, I did not throw it on a slide. One technique is called leading lines, and this is where the lines in your image point to a particular spot. Like if you had a road traveling into the distance and all the lines of that road converge at a vanishing point. If you were to place an important object or even the title of a book right where the points, the sides of the roads meet, it would direct the viewer's eye to that spot. There was an example in the exploration from a book called Wall Street, where it's looking upward amidst a bunch of skyscrapers, and they all converge. It looks like they all come together towards the center, and they're pointing towards the title of the book. And so it's pointing attention in that way. Something very similar is the use of concentric circles. It's kind of like a target, it leads into the center. So our eye is drawn to the fly, and a little bit more subtly in this case, but we've got these concentric shapes leading inwards with the silhouettes of the faces, and that stark white silhouette against the very dark black silhouette adds emphasis, so that the female silhouette becomes a frame highlighting the title and drawing attention. So when you're working on your designs, whether it's your practice this week or your final project next week, when you choose an image, take a look at the what's in the image and the lines and shapes that are there. Not just what it actually shows, but the lines that appear that kind of could influence the viewer's attention. And position your elements to take advantage of those, if that's an option, if it lends itself to that. All right, and just to kind of give this a little bit more of a media neutral angle, these ideas are not specifically to book cover design or graphic design in that sense. I actually included book covers as an exploration at the suggestion of one of my former students. Someone suggested that as an option, and I thought that worked pretty well. But think of these things in broad terms. I've mentioned web design kind of frequently because it really applies in this case. Typography is relevant, but visual hierarchy is one of the fundamental considerations for web design. Directing your viewer's attention, whether it's to important navigation elements like the Register Now button, because obviously that's a very important function. You want your visitors to register for your business or for your newsletter or what have you. And then they've also used that red to emphasize their main content area, and even the word design, which is one of the most important words in the title, because that identifies what this is all about. Look for ways that you can apply these regardless. It's the same applies in filmmaking with a scene, setting up a scene with color. We looked at the scene from Schindler's List last week with the little girl in a red coat. You see how that creates a visual hierarchy in itself. All right. So in tomorrow's Photoshop practice, it's not part of the requirements to think about visual hierarchy, but it is to your benefit to start thinking in terms of visual hierarchy with your traveling ducks. If you've looked at that assignment, it has a little bit of a fun twist to it, but decide where you want to put emphasis based on where you put the ducks and how large they are in relation to the rest of the scene. All right. Are there any final questions before we wrap up?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, that's what I had prepared for tonight. It's a little bit of a mashup of topics this week, but just some things I really wanted to cover in class. If you guys are all set, then I'm happy to let you go for the evening. But I do appreciate you joining me here again tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. Have a great week.
Thanks. You as well. Good night, Robert.
Bye.
Bye.